Welcome back, and we're back with our X5 G05, and we're continuing here in the front with the chassis leg. And as you can see, the chassis leg is bent up here and took a good hit in the crash. And as some of you maybe remember, and what I also said in a couple of previous videos, is that we're gonna take the engine out, which we did, and send this car off to Diego because he does framework and stuff like that, and he's gonna try to bend this entire chassis leg back. But after we did a little bit of research and got more knowledge about this entire thing, we saw this as a challenge, and are now gonna try and attempt to do this on our own. And what we're gonna try to attempt to do is to switch out this entire chassis leg, and it is a little bit easier than we thought before because we thought this entire thing is connected to the chassis itself. But I mean, it is connected, but it is just screwed in and riveted in here with some panel bond as well. And what also makes it a little bit easier, since this is aluminum, my dad owns a business which works with aluminum windows, so he also has a lot of knowledge about this. So as I said, what we're gonna do is take out this entire chassis leg, and there's a lot of parts to it that we have to do. And the first thing that we're gonna try to do, and also do, is take out the entire suspension and also the other components, just as the control arms and stuff like that, because we are gonna drop the entire subframe. Because what we are thinking is that the entire subframe is bent and pulling this entire chassis leg in this direction, because as you can see, this holder back here, we took the screw out and it is completely off center and pulled towards the front. So what we're thinking is that this entire subframe is kind of turned that way, because this entire chassis leg is being pulled in this direction, because we measured everything beforehand and this is off by a couple of millimeters. And we can also see down here from the crash that this entire subframe down here is pulled that way. So we already have a new subframe, so that's what we're gonna have to do, is drop this entire subframe. And because we're dropping the entire subframe, we need to disconnect all of these control arms, because otherwise the wheel and everything will just swing and be in the way of working on everything. And same thing on this side, take it off. And as you may have seen, all of this tape that goes around the entire car is what we marked for ourselves, is the new structural cut that we're getting from a car that we found, and they're gonna be sending it to us. And this entire thing took a little bit, because obviously people don't just have an entire structural cut like this that we need laying around in the yard. So this is also why this took a little bit longer, and also finding a lot like the panel bond and also seam sealer, the right one and everything that we need for this. So that also took a little bit, also shipping and everything. So that's kind of why everything got a little bit delayed. So we're gonna start off on the suspension on the left and the right side to kind of get a little bit weight off the entire subframe, so that we have all of this done, and then we can finally drop the entire subframe. And after we did that, we're gonna hold the new one and kind of see where the entire position is and what we have to do. Then obviously measure a lot. We have some references up there with a couple of measurements. And next up, we're gonna start here on this control arm and everything. This is connected to this little piece. I'm not too sure what it's called. If you know, let me know. But this has one screw up here and two on the bottom right here to hold this entire thing in. And then we're gonna take off this control arm. So surprise, surprise, you can turn on this little nut back here, which holds the control arm and everything for days and days. But what we didn't know is that this piece isn't even held on with this little nut back here, because at first we thought that this little nut and the bolt back here is connected to this little piece in the front back here. But then after turning on the nut and then noticing that the bolt is not coming out, we started on the ones that are attached on the bottom, and then we noticed that the thing just slides right out, and that this control arm is connected back here with this bolt. Yeah, for anyone that needs to take out or switch these parts out, to save you a little time, this part is just connected with the two bolts on the bottom. So now we just got everything disconnected, which is actually connected to the subframe itself, the front control arm and this center one up here. And then we put a little 2x4 in between here to give it a little space so that this control arm comes out, because otherwise it will just go over there and still be in the subframe. And we obviously can't put too much tension on the entire suspension because the suspension is connected up here with these 3 screws to the strut tower. So we can't do too much there, but we put a little bit in between there so that it is completely disconnected from the subframe. And yeah, let's do the other side. So now after moving on to the other side, we just ran into our next problem, and that's after taking this bolt out, this front control arm doesn't really want to come out because the entire subframe is kind of smushed together here. And as you can maybe see, the black pieces right here of the entire subframe is kind of smushed together right here. And it's not the control arm is still fine. It's just the integral pieces that are kind of smushed together from the subframe, so this entire thing is kind of stuck in there. So what we're going to do now to get this entire control arm out, and we don't really want to damage this entire part because it is in a good condition, we do want to reuse it. So what we're going to do is take an angle grinder and make 2 cuts right here, as deep as we can go back here, so that this entire part of the subframe can kind of move over and we can maybe bend it over so that we can get this control arm out. And it doesn't really matter because the subframe already is damaged, so we can cut in there. And here you can see we did 2 cuts. On the bottom we're completely through to the other side, and on the top we only went halfway, but that should hopefully be enough to get the tension away and to kind of bend it. Obviously it's steel, so it's going to be a little bit rough, but we'll try. So as you just saw, that wasn't really enough, so we're going to cut on the other side on the top here to kind of get a little bit more tension off. So now after a little bit more cutting and prying a little bit, because we did use a pry bar, but we were really careful because this is cast aluminum and very brittle and soft, and since we want to reuse it, we don't really want to damage it. And inside the bushing in here is metal, and then in between it's rubber to kind of take out vibrations and stuff like that and to keep it a little bit flexible. So what we did is put another slit up here and then cut a little bit more on the bottom right here, what we already did before, and kind of hit this towards the outside to kind of give it a little bit more space, and then also put a pry bar in here and try to get it out, and that seems to be the solution. So now we finally got it out, and here you can actually see of how much this entire thing bent. This entire thing used to be straight, and now it's just kind of mushed together. And there was definitely a lot of tension on there, but we finally got it out. And here again, our number 1 rule, put all the nuts and screws back, and also this little plate which sits on the nut on here, kind of just clips on there and kind of secures the nut from not loosening itself. So before we actually remove the next control arm and everything's kind of loose on the bottom, we're gonna start by disconnecting everything here on the top, such as these connectors back here, and this big power line which goes all the way through the back right here and leads away all the way to here. So we're gonna have to disconnect everything that is actually connected to the chassis leg itself. For example, also the brake line, but we're also just gonna keep this here because that's attached to the strut tower and not to the chassis leg itself right here, as you can see. But we are gonna take off the brake caliper and try to hang it up somewhere because we really don't want to take this off and have to bleed them again after. So we're gonna take these off too and try to hang them up. But yeah, we're gonna start on that now. And here you can see a good example on BMW connectors. The red part right there is a seal, and all these connectors that are on the outside and obviously will get wet are sealed very, very good. So on BMW cars, you don't really have to worry too much if you have a flooded car, stuff like that. And next up is the wheel speed sensor, which goes all the way from up here on the back of the wheel. And now after disconnecting this entire line from the chassis leg itself, we now have to do the height sensor up here, which as you just saw, I unplugged it right here. And now I have to pop it off right here, because if you forget it and rip it off, it's not going to be the best. I had that experience before where I didn't really see it, and this piece is just plastic and it's really, really brittle and will just break if you rip it too hard. So that's why we're going to pop it off. And here we have two connectors for the plus, which were connected to the engine, which we already had to take off. The wires itself are still in here, which we have to take off on the bottom right here. And as you already saw on the other side, we disconnected the entire cable and everything, and we still have a holder here and on top. And next up, we're going to take the brake caliper off, and it only has 2 screws on the back, so that's going to be pretty simple to take this entire thing off. But after that, we're going to hang it up and try to find a solution for it, because as I said, we don't want to disconnect it, so afterwards we don't have to bleed the brakes. So as you can see, we finally have the brake caliper out and have it laying on some wooden blocks right now, and still have it connected up here completely. And it is far away from the chassis leg and everything, so we should have enough space right here. And this is probably how we're going to keep it. And as you can see, the brake pads still have a little bit on it, but not too much. So we're also going to switch these out since we already have it out. So next up, we're going to be taking off this entire knuckle piece. First, we're going to take off this little nut up here, which clamps onto this piece. And then we're going to take off this nut on the bottom right here, which connects the suspension to the entire part. And then we can take off the entire knuckle piece with the brake and everything. And then after that, we can take out the suspension, which only has 3 screws on the top. So now we have the entire thing out, the entire knuckle with both of the control arms. This thing is really, really heavy, so I'm gonna go lay it down real quick. So now after taking out the entire knuckle, the only thing that we have left is the entire suspension, and that is only connected by 3 of these screws on top of right here. And I'm gonna take those off now, and then we can slide the suspension out. So my dad's gonna be taking out these screws on the top, and I'm gonna be holding the suspension so it doesn't just drop down. So that is the entire suspension out, and now we have a lot of room to play down there. And next up, after taking everything out, we can now take the wiring harness off from here, not disconnect it, but take it off from this little clip right here, and then we can scoot it onto the car. And now after taking everything apart, we can now definitely see where everything is put together with each other. And for example, back here, this is where the chassis leg itself is attached to the chassis of the car itself. And we can see that everything on here is aluminum except for the chassis itself. We have a magnet right here, and everything here is aluminum. Also, the strut tower up here is cast aluminum. Everything up here is aluminum except for the chassis itself. And as you can see, and also the subframe is completely
of steel. And since this entire chassis leg is aluminum, it is secured with rivets up here and screws along the entire outside, which we can see on the other side. Here on the other side, we already took a little bit of the seam sealer off, and we can see that there is this screw. And these type of screws are called FDS, which stands for flow drill screws, and it's actually pretty cool to see how they work. And if you take a look here in the chassis leg, we can see those flow drill screws being used. They kind of look like little spikes sticking out. You can kind of think about them like a self-tapper, but even better, because a self-tapper only drills a hole and makes their own thread. But these screws are really cool because they also drill into it, but they don't take away any material. They drill through it and also add more thread because they pull the aluminum into the third dimension and add about 3 millimeters of extra thread, so it makes it even stronger. And next up, after taking out the entire suspension, we're going to be dropping this entire subframe, which has about 7 or 8 screws. We're going to take out this back one right here to kind of check it. And yeah, we're going to drop this now, and then after that we should also figure out more about this chassis leg. And you could definitely tell that there was a lot of tension on there, and I'm guessing that there's still a lot of tension on there because this subframe has like points on here where the chassis leg kind of slides onto, or the other way around, where the subframe slides into the chassis leg. So we're gonna drop it down and then we'll see where we're at. So we finally got our subframe out, which I was really excited about, and we have some really good news. Let me show you. And as you may remember, I told you guys that the subframe is connected with 8 screws. It has 4 on both sides, one here, one here, one here, and this little hanger up here, which means that we have 3 points of measurements which we can use because we can't really use the one which is for the hanger up here. And what we have here is our little cheat sheet with the frame dimensions, which shows us exactly what the dimensions are from what point to what point. And this is exactly what we can use those 3 points for, because we can take each corner to every corner and also side to side. So what we did first, we took this corner and put it over to this center, and that matched up perfectly. And then we took this center and put it to this center. Obviously everything we did underneath because that's where the bolts go into, and we can measure the center of the hole itself, and that was also perfect from center to center. And then another point that we did is also underneath, all the way back here to the front of this corner right here, and that was also perfect, which is really good because first we thought that this chassis leg was also bent a little bit, but as I said in the beginning, we kind of thought that the subframe, since it was bent, that it was pulling the chassis leg to this side. But now after taking it out, there's no more tension on it, and the chassis leg is straight and everything seems fine, which now means that we don't have to work a lot on this chassis leg. The only thing that we do have to do is fix up these corners right here because they are poking out a little bit, and also on the inside right here. It is too much on the inside, but we have a hydraulic press which we can use to bend this correctly. And obviously, since this entire thing is aluminum, we have to heat it up, because if you don't heat it up, it will just crack. And if you heat it up, you can bend it however you want, which is really good, and the nice part about aluminum. And if you take a look on the other chassis leg, the measurements show us that the chassis leg is straight to this kind of line right here, because the point that we measured is right here and everything seems straight. And this is also a good sign because this shows us that the strut tower is fine. The only thing that we have down here is this little crack between the chassis leg and this right here, but this is just glued together with panel bond, so that's nothing bad. And this doesn't necessarily mean that the strut tower is bent. This is because the chassis leg
is bent over and also twisted, which is why the bottom is split open and the top is still attached. And since the entire chassis leg took a hit to the left, this is also why this support frame is kind of mushed up and compressed on the bottom right here. So this is also another part that we have to swap out, which is just riveted to the top of this frame up here. So really the only parts that we are replacing up here is the support frame right here and the chassis leg. So what we're gonna go ahead and do now is take off this crash bar, because we initially put it inside of it, because at the start when we measured it, when the subframe and everything was inside, we did notice that the chassis leg was bent a little bit, but that was again because the subframe was inside of it and pulling it. But now we're gonna take it off and then we're gonna continue on working on this chassis leg. So a little bit sad about you, you can't get structural parts like the chassis leg, which we actually need for this car from BMW as an OEM part, because they don't want to sell it to you because of safety issues, which if you think about it is not really the case. And it's not actually the lawmakers that regulate BMW on this, it's BMW themselves. And this just goes for the US, which is kind of sad because there's a lot of people out here that do repairs like this and also need structural parts like this for crashes like this. So that's kind of sad that BMW does this. But if you want to take the other way, you can buy structural cuts, which we actually did, which I'll show you in a minute. Or you can just go and cross the border to Mexico and buy OEM parts there. Or you can order it in Europe and let it ship to you, which will be an extra cost, but you will have an OEM part. But if you buy completely new, the structural cut, or just the used part itself, doesn't really matter, because the chassis leg itself is completely aluminum and will hold probably for hundreds of years. It doesn't rust and it will probably outlast the rest of the entire car. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is our structural cut, which we got off of eBay from a serious dealer that does tons of parts like this and sells a lot of parts like this. So everything is official, everything is good and certified. And this structural cut is really, really nice. And even online on eBay where we bought it, you can see the entire car, and the car which this part came off of didn't have any damage in the front, only in the back, which means that this front is completely fine. It doesn't have anything. And this means that we can use everything off of this, and even if the strut tower on ours was damaged, we can use it from off of this one. But obviously we only need that little A-frame, which we call it, and the chassis leg itself. And this entire part is kind of 20% of another car, got completely cut out. They even asked us what we need and where they want us to cut it, which is also why we took that blue tape line as you saw at the start of the video, because that was the measurements that we told them where we wanted it, which is really, really nice. And yeah, this is the way that most people have to go in the US, because you obviously, as I said, can't buy it from BMW as an OEM part, which is kind of sad but true. But this doesn't really matter, because this is also from an X5, and when this car got crashed, or when it had the crash and got taken off the roads, this car has 48,000 miles, which is a perfect match because our X5 has 45,000 miles. So it doesn't really matter if you buy completely new from overseas or a structural cut like this one, and even if they have the same amount of miles, which is completely perfect. So that doesn't really matter, but BMW, that's kind of sad that you guys do this. So as I said, the next thing that we're gonna do is to be correcting this chassis leg, because this is the base to be continuing with this. So step one is gonna be correcting this chassis leg with the opening back here, because everything else is fine, and also up here is completely fine. So we're gonna be touching up this, because this is, again, step one, and then we can continue to step two. But we won't be doing step two in this video, because we don't really have what we need right now to take it out and to swap it out again, because we are missing the rivets and panel bond and stuff like that, because that is on the way. But besides that, we have everything else, so we won't be touching this, sadly. So sadly, next weekend we'll have another break because of business and family reasons. But after that, we'll get right back into it and switch this one out for the new one. But as of right now, we're gonna continue with this chassis leg. So here we have our hydraulic press, and right now we have the spreader on top. There's lots of different attachments that you can put on here, but since we want to go in here and try to get this little dent out on the side, we're gonna hold it in here, and my dad's gonna press it, and hopefully it should come back. For this, we won't really heat it up because it's just gonna kind of bend it back a little bit, but later for the front piece, we'll have to heat this up. So as you just saw, we widened it first with the spreader and then with another attachment that we use, which is a little bit better for smaller points that you want to do. And as you just saw, when I slid the crash bar back in, it goes in with no problem. And it's not stuck anymore. And now the only thing that we're going to do is these corners because these are bent because of the crash bar when it got bent to the other side. And as you saw, it works perfectly now, and the only thing we now have to do is this corner, and you can see that it's bent also from the primer in here and everything. So as I always said, we're not going to cut any corners, so we're going to bend it back. Even though it is like this, it could still work like this, but it's just for the eye, and as I said, we're not going to cut any corners and make it as good as possible, so we're going to move on to that now. So you can see again that we have the spreader in here, and since the spreader is not enough to reach the other side of the chassis leg, we put a old nut that we have, and it works pretty well. So that's what we're using right now, and we're also heating this entire thing up. Obviously this entire thing doesn't look that nice because we're hitting it a lot, but we're going to sand it down and primer it again and everything, so it's going to look really good at the end. But the bottom already looks way better than it did before, almost straight, and now we're working on the top. So as you guys just saw, we used a chisel to kind of clean up the edges and the front piece right here. The chisel that we had is usually used for wood, but since it has a harder top piece, or the corner kind of, you can use it really well on aluminum, like stuff like this. And yeah, this piece looks a million times better than before. It's completely straight, and we also tested the screws and they fit really well, so the thread and everything still works perfectly fine. Obviously, as of right now, doesn't look that well because we hit it a lot, and again, we use the chisel to kind of clean it up, but we're going to sand it down and primer it and everything again. So as you just saw, we cleaned it a little bit with some cleaner to get all the oil and debris off and stuff like that. And then we hit it with some alcohol to get all the stuff off from the cleaner. And now we're gonna sand it one more time, and then after that, we can probably hit it with a primer. So we just took the sandpaper and hit everything a little bit to kind of open it up, because we just want to hit these parts that are completely open and exposed and open up everything else so that it has contact, and so it can like fade in a little bit. And now we can go ahead and hit it with the primer. Now after letting the primer sit for about 15 minutes, we just sanded it down a little bit on a couple of parts, and now we can hit it with the actual paint. And we're not actually painting everything, just the corner here. And we went really small with the primer, and we're going deeper on the chassis leg every time with the paint, and then afterwards with the clear coat. Already this is better than what they do on OEM, because as you can see back here, it's barely painted, because that's just kind of the mist of the rest of the color when they paint the strut tower and stuff like that. After this layer of the paint, after it dries, we're going to take off the tape and then go a little bit deeper with the clear coat. And this entire painting has 4 steps. First the primer, then the white, then the pearl, and then the clear coat. And we also just added a little bit more white to fade it in better. And now we're doing the mid coat, which is the pearl coat. And last step, now the clear coat. I'm super happy about how this entire thing turned out. Looks way better than before, and actually looks like a normal chassis leg for right now. And yeah, it looks super good. You can see a couple of scuffs right here. We would have done it better if you would actually see it, but after this and after everything is put back together, we hopefully won't see it again. And we have one thing that we have to do on this chassis leg is to put one weld here. We won't be doing it, it will be Diego, and then after that, this entire side is completely finished. Made a lot of progress, dropped the entire subframe, and also got this entire corner out, which I'm super excited about. Catch you guys in the next video when we're tackling this guy. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the post notification. Drive safe and stay tuned.